Mo, Sam, thanks for joining the podcast. Great to have you guys join the show. First of all, would like if you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Mo, you're the co-founder CEO of Kitopi. Sam, you're the CTO and co-founder of Kitopi. So how do you guys meet? How do you get started? Tell us the whole story.
Yeah, so thanks for having us here. We're pretty excited to do this. Sam and I don't do joint podcasts. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to it. So, my quick background on myself. Prior to Kitopi, I co-founded another company called B&B. We were in the confectionery space and scaled that business up over 8 years. Sold it to private equity, and then started angel investing, and stumbled upon this idea, and decided to myself and Sam and a couple other of our friends decided to come and venture into this and do this full time. So that's my story. Sam?
Yeah, so I'm Sam. I'm from Dubai. I've been living here since '96. My background is systems, information systems. I was in California, came back in 2009, worked at a family architecture and engineering company based here in Dubai, really worked on the system side of things for a number of years. 2012, when the startup ecosystem was developing in the UAE, I founded a series of startups, mainly in the e-commerce space. Some successes, lots of failures, until I joined forces with Moody when he came up with what was a radical idea at the time, which ultimately became Kitopi in 2017.
Sam, I think we had you on another show during the STEP conference on stage, and we had you smash a fax machine with a baseball bat. Remember? I think
that was definitely good therapy. I think you guys read my LinkedIn profile, saw my passion towards fax machines. But
we're not going to have as much fun here today. No fax machine smashing. Yeah, I think you mentioned that in your bio, right? Among other things, that you hate fax machines.
It was one of my pet peeves.
So I'm assuming, did you ever have to get a fax machine number for Kitopi? Do you guys have?
I don't have any fax machines. You won't find a fax machine in Kitopi, I promise you that.
I tried.
And you hate printers as well. Yeah, I read that you hate printing paper.
Yeah. Anything to do with the inefficiencies, and definitely very passionate about digitalizing the workplace.
Awesome. So let's start with talking a little bit about Kitopi. How does the Kitopi model differ from other food aggregators, from other cloud kitchens like Travis's ex-Uber CEO and founder model? How does it stand out? How is it different as a model? Well,
so think of the cloud kitchen space to have 3 layers. So 3 layers of that stack. So the first layer, and which is kind of the most popular layer, which is the real estate layer. There's a lot of people doing that. So they build out kitchens and lease them out to restaurants, operators, and that is a good take on real estate. That we're slowly seeing that begin being commoditized, similar to what happened in work. The second layer of the stack are people who are building delivery-only brands, which so you have a lot of players attempting to do this on a global level. These are delivery-only brands. Some people call them dark kitchens, ghost kitchens. I mean, there's multiple variants of these names. And the reality is they are focused on building the most efficient set of brands for the delivery world. We are not on that stack either. And the third layer of the stack is where we play in, which is, think of it as a managed kitchen as a service. So imagine you are a brand in New York. You wanna scale up to Dubai or any of the cities we operate in. You would license your brand out to us. We would operate on your behalf. Think of it as franchising 2.0. We're a platform that enables you to scale up in any one of the sites we operate in by cooking, delivering on your behalf.
So if a restaurant, can you give me an example of a restaurant that you've achieved a success that you got on as a customer, and what was the process for them, and what were the results for them? What model did they shift from originally? So if it's an existing restaurant, and do you have usually new restaurant brand that comes in?
So we have 200 restaurant partners, and they're all successful in their different ways. And we have multiple use cases. We have a restaurant that is in New York, Nathan's Famous, for example, that wants to operate in the Middle East. So that's a use case where we help them scale up by licensing their brand and giving them access to a market they weren't in. Another use case is a brand that is in one part of town but not covering another part of town. Papa John's is an example. And we would give them access to another part of the city, right? Still on the expansion mode. And then there's a third use case, which is brands that doesn't make economic sense for them to operate in their existing site, right? So given that the delivery revenues are a larger contributor now to their total revenue, it just doesn't make economic sense to a lot of restaurants to operate under that landscape. So the third use case is brands who want to just shut down shop and move that entire business out to us. And we would operate on their behalf. And then the fourth, which is kind of the more recent and developing super fast, is restaurants that don't typically, or brands that don't typically operate in a normal restaurant format. So think of an influencer, think of what happened in beauty when influencers started building their own beauty lines. We see that happening in the food space, and those are not brand builders who typically own restaurants or build restaurants, but those are brand owners who understand how to acquire users very efficiently and build a brand persona around them. So that's kind of the latest use case we see.
And can you tell us a little bit about the operational part of Kitopi, the kitchen as the product, and then Sam can share more about the tech side, where the tech side comes into that. So essentially, what do you consider is the essence of your product as a whole? Is it the kitchen? Is it the process, the efficiency? Is it the tech? Which part, and how do these work together?
It's that end-to-end service that we offer the restaurant, right? So we help restaurants scale. It's very simple, right? So you're a restaurant. We're not just giving you software. We're not just giving you infrastructure. We're allowing you to scale by taking you and giving an end-to-end solution, which is what makes us very different to others. There's a lot of people giving one piece of that puzzle. We think that the ecosystem comes in together. I mean, if you think about the problem we're trying to solve, right? From a customer perspective, they get food faster. They get food, customer and consumer, right? They get food faster. They get the right selection in all different parts of town, and they get it within the right. If you ordered a salad and a main course, you want to make sure that you didn't forget the sauce, you didn't forget the main course, so you want to make sure that the accuracy rate is pretty high in food. So what we offer is the solution to that from a customer perspective. From a brand perspective, we give you the ability to scale up super fast. You don't have to think about the whole solution. You license your brand out to us. We take you live within 2 weeks. And then if you think about it from an aggregator perspective, which is kind of completing the whole ecosystem, and what I mean by aggregator, I mean the food tech marketplace and aggregators, the likes of Uber Eats and Deliveroo, the likes. What we offer them is the ability to work with a very innovative operator that allows them to reduce their rider waiting time. It allows them to, so in essence, we're telling them you can deliver more orders per hour with your riders with us than with someone else. Why? Because of our software, which Sam can kind of elaborate on later on. But I do think that the cost of delivery is the largest cost to an aggregator, and if you help them cut that cost down by half, you just save them a lot of money, and that's how you kind of make the whole ecosystem work very efficiently.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the unit economics a little bit more details later on. But Sam, on the tech side, where does the tech side come in? Can you explain your products from a tech point of view in a bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sort of elaborate. So our restaurants, the partners that entrust us with their brand, they're tapping into that infrastructure of supply chain, of smart kitchens, of cooks in the kitchen. And our tech sits in the heart of that. It enables us to do what we do. It's essentially what we call SCOS, our Smart Kitchen Operating System, and it's the operating system that powers our kitchens. It handles the end-to-end order experience. So everything to do when we receive the order, we route it to the kitchen closest to the consumer, we route it to the correct cook in the kitchen based on the actual order item, and everything in between all the way to the hands of the consumer. It's essentially geared to simplify the operations, to enhance the operational efficiencies, but most importantly, it's geared towards enhancing the consumer experience.
And when you got started, how did that tech develop from when you got started till today in comparison? So, I mean, something like Kitopi, and that's something that's in general is a cash-intensive business, right? So you guys have raised tens of millions of dollars a day. To date, you're one of the most funded startups. But when you start such a business, where do you start first? Do you start?
And that's definitely a very, very good question, and I'd definitely love to share our learnings there. When we started January 2018, we conceptualized the idea around mid-2017, and we set to launch by January 2018 in our first kitchen in Dubai, in Al Quds. And that date was not going to change. We were launching January 2018. So I did what most people would do, see what software and systems are available off the shelf to get up and going. And I must have sat with every POS provider you can imagine, from NCR to Partex to Squirrel to all the main POS systems that have been around for ages in the restaurant space. And I kept hitting a roadblock. That roadblock was essentially, first, all their functionality, their core features was primarily geared towards dine-in for very good reason, because that's been the popular demand for the longest time. So when it came to delivery orders, there is a different user flow in that journey. The delivery orders are packaged. For example, there's drivers involved that are an essential part to the experience. We had a second layer of complexity to what was already a very early stage of cloud kitchen technology. Our second complexity was multiple brands in a single kitchen, right? Where a cook can even cook across multiple different brands. That was an extremely unconventional scenario. That said, we spoke to a lot of tech, a lot of startup POSs and techs, and I did what I necessarily do in a situation like that. We practically begged them to add this to their feature and wish list, to their feature roadmaps. And we kept getting this is an unusual request. It's very tailored to your need. And it's not a popular requirement. So long story cut short, we ended up using what was essentially the best of the worst. And we started with it. We had to do a lot of hacking to sort of provide our core MVP service. An example of what that looked like within our kitchens, we would have these screens called KDS screens, kitchen display screens, which was essentially where the cook would see what he needs to prepare. We would have a separate browser for every single brand. So if you think about all the browsers you have, Chrome was one brand, Mozilla was another brand, Internet Explorer, try 22 browsers for 22 brands. If I heard someone was building a startup browser, I'd be the first person there, so that we can actually launch another brand. We had to do a lot of unconventional hacks, and that was fine. It took us from A to B. Our first couple of kitchens, we were able to swim in those waters, but the moment we started to expand and we started onboarding a lot more brands, and especially when we started crossing borders to other cities, it wasn't sustainable. And it quickly became clear in the first year that if we don't build out our own tailored tech stack geared towards cloud kitchens, we were not going to be able to deliver the best consumer experience. So by the end of the year, we had made a decision to build out our own tech stack, and we started, and we took it from there.
So how long have you been now into your own tech stack? Is everything of the core tech now is Kitopi stack, right, today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been roughly 2 years.
And from when you shifted to your own tech stack, one big issue among a lot of technical co-founders and CTOs is then, how do you prioritize your roadmap and your features on all the things that you wanted to do when, you're asking the third-party vendors to do before, and then it's suddenly in your hand, but you have limited resource time to do that. What's your methodology to prioritizing features that go into your roadmap?
Yeah, so you always go based on the most severe pain points, right? And one of the good things that came out of using the tech that was out there was we really got to understand what we valued and what we didn't, and where our most fundamental pain points were. And with the speed that we were growing, it quickly became clear what components we needed to work on first. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to grow, right? And we were really focusing on the enabling foundations to begin with. For example, one of the most fundamental features, a feature that is one of our most popular use cases today, is the elasticity of menus within an actual kitchen. So we were still trying to figure out what was the right layout, what was the right floor plan in the kitchen. Meaning we were changing things a lot. You know, we had several generations of designs in the kitchen, and each one of them required a substantial amount of changes on the systems that we were already using before we built out our own tech stack. So when you know what you don't know, and we knew that we didn't have the most efficient, we weren't sure what the most efficient design was in the kitchen, what we did was we designed for elasticity. We ensured that we were able to adjust the workflows of menu items within the kitchens to ensure that we can be agile and we can change our working methodology in a way that doesn't become a bottleneck. So for example, like a Coke, a workflow for a Coke is just you pack it and then you dispatch it. But a burger, for example, there's a preparation, then a pack, and then a dispatch. That's a three-step workflow. Those sort of elasticities were fundamentals in the very beginning when we were still trying to figure out what was the sort of methodology we were going to be working in.
So your tech essentially was built around changes that could happen in your kitchen design. Yeah. This is one of the main impacts.
We essentially embedded elasticity in the core components. Now, embedding too much elasticity into your tech is also a bad thing. It affects usability. So we really had to find out that the kitchen was the most dynamic component of our business, and we created an elastic model around that kitchen.
Mo, to talk about the kitchen design, and I know you have multiple generations of kitchens. What's your approach within that compared to like other industry peers and globally? What best practices do you follow? What learnings have you seen from the space? I mean, kitchen design is core to speed, right, and efficiency. And if you've seen the founder, the McDonald's movie, it's a lot about the whole like kitchen design when they drew it out on the tennis court and how things move around. Have you been drawing around kitchens over and over in tennis courts? Maybe can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Again, if you think about it, the way we approach building a kitchen starts with what does the customer want? Right, so let's go with a part of town in Dubai called Dubai Marina. What do customers in Dubai Marina want? And they want these following 10 cuisine types. And then we go, next step is let's go find the best content out there, the best brands out there that can kind of fulfill that demand. And then that's step 2, right? So we will figure out what are the brands, how can we cook these brands in the most efficient way possible? And then step 3 would be, okay, what kitchen capacity do we need to service that demand? Right? And then based on that, we then go say, okay, how can we design a kitchen most efficient way possible to get that out? And I think that's kind of the logic we arrive to, as opposed to let's build a kitchen and figure out what can we cook inside this kitchen. Now, that said, we need a lot of flexibility in our kitchens, and so they are very modular in nature, just because relevant content today might not be relevant content in a week from now, right? And then the ability for us to be very flexible to adapt to what customers want is something that we think we're good at. So if you put in all these variables in together, and ability for us to really have people who have never worked in the kitchen, and to think about how can we solve for 3 things. Like how can we solve for speed? And so I think that's something we think about, and typically in a normal QSR kitchen, you don't really think about that because you don't have to think about the entire end-to-end delivery all the way to that. If you're not thinking about where do I dispatch, where the drivers wait, you're not thinking about that in a typical restaurant, right? So speed is important. Availability of products, and this is where our conveyor systems and barcode systems allows us to really eliminate any error when it comes down to order accuracy. All right, so if you look at the last 2020 Q3 Mac delivery report that's public, you'll see that depending on the market, 3 to 5% of all Mac delivery orders depending on the city, had an error inside it. right? And it's 0.2% on our side. And a big part is due to a lot of the design and technology we built on a kitchen level. And the third thing we look at is quality, right? Think about a typical kitchen. It's there's a lot of traditional ways of how do you monitor quality in a kitchen, of which some will obviously implement, such as a lot of training, a lot of oversight. But there's also a lot that we have thought about that is not typical of the food space, right? So if you enter for kitchens, you'd see our kitchens are fully covered. We have cameras covering the entire kitchen. It allows us to monitor if for any reason that there is an anomaly, such as I didn't wear my mask or I didn't wear my hairnet. We would be in real time alerted that there's something wrong. If you use the wrong colored chopping knife, the wrong chopping board, we'll be alerted, and things like that. So if you think of kitchen design, when we think of kitchen design, we think of it more not just in isolation of a 2D layout, but more about how does it fit into really solving, really getting customers what they want, right? Which is food delivered on their terms.
What is your error rate in comparison? You mentioned the Mac delivery.
0.2% versus 3 to 5%.
And that's applied on, so the Mac delivery ones apply on all their deliveries versus yours, like in terms of numbers, the sample size?
Yeah. So I'm talking about like on the average of the year, right? So the annual average.
And where does, like, what contributes to the error the most, do you think, and within yours or Mac delivery?
You would have not. I'm sure you'll find this hard to believe, and it's something that Sam and I found extremely hard to believe, is that the number one complaint we used to face when we launched the business, and it seems like it's the number one complaint across the industry, is missing items. Our staff forgetting to put the order that the customer ordered, like the complete order. Something as simple as that, turns out it's one of the biggest issues in the kitchen. So that's what we're trying to do.
And how do you solve for that? You just have like someone checking as each bag is going out, or is there like a tech component that's embedded into it?
That's how it started, right? Like anything else we do, it's kind of build or buy logic, and what can we solve in the interim till we figure out how to build this, if we need to build or buy it. And so initially it was, let's have 3 people cross-check something manually and document it. Right, obviously not scalable in nature, and error rate wasn't brought down a lot until our product team spend a lot of time on the ground, right? So this is not a team that runs things virtually, but they're very much hands-on in our kitchens, or depending on what part of the problem we're trying to solve. And so one of our product leads was, they looked at the problem and they're like, the best way to solve this is very simple logic that is applied in other fulfillment verticals. Right? If you think of our business as a fulfillment vertical of food, in other fulfillment verticals of non-food, they'd have a scanner, a barcode scanner. Everything's scanned. No one scans anything in on-demand food, right? So a very simple logic like that was applied and automated. I mean, that was a starting point of how we started to figure it out. Sam, would you add anything to that?
Yeah. So the product that Moody is describing, it solves multiple problems in one, right? So when you see how an order is distributed in the kitchen, so let's say you ordered you have a fries and a Big Mac and a salad. I know not the right combination, but let's say you get that, right? They would distribute across the kitchen. The burger would go to the grill section, the fries would go to the fry section, to the fryer section, and the salad would go to the salad section. They would distribute. A challenge becomes bringing that order together. So everybody would place their finished item, they would barcode it, label it, and then place it on a conveyor, and that conveyor would travel to an assembly team. That assembly team needs to assemble the order. They now need to know that this item goes with that, this item goes with that order. So they end up scanning, and that scanning solution is actually aiding them in their sorting process, but it's also ensuring and validating that item was indeed prepared while doing so.
So the scanning of a in other fulfillment, so it's easier to scan because everything is barcoded and so on. So how would you do that with smaller items? I don't know, like cutlery, for example.
Cutlery wouldn't be barcoded. That would be sitting in the dispatcher anyways. And they would have like very clear visual to-do list tasks where they would acknowledge that they've added those in. But the main items, which is in the end of the day is the vast majority of sort of a complaint, is if you miss an actual food item. Those items would be prepared and barcoded at the same time.
Okay, what about missing something in the item? Like I asked to add a pickle or whatever.
Yeah, so we aid those through better training and very clear visual references.
And for the items itself, is there a way to automate that at some point where?
Yeah, so we use a lot of smart appliances in the kitchen to automate a lot of the cooking in many ways. So if we talk about, for example, we're actually using a salad robot to automatically prepare salad, up to 20 ingredients, and it dispenses it based on the exact quantity, weighted, and dispensing the sauce, the proteins, as well as the salad. There's a lower margin of error when you actually automate those tasks. When it comes to the preparation of hot food items, we use smart ovens, which automate cooking based on temperature, time, and configuration. A lot of the items are pre-prepared in a hub and spoke model in the central kitchen and dispatched to the satellite. So they would place those items into a smart oven, and then they would just use the templated setting. So they would just put tawuk, for example, place it on the shelf, and it would cook it down to precision. And you can cook a variety of items at the same time within these smart ovens. You can have lasagna on one, tawuk on another, and even hot vegetables with no cross-contamination through a technique known as convection cooking.
So right now, the AI that you're using is an assistant to humans, right? So it's the smart oven, the salad mixer, and so on. Do you see one day that your kitchen is going to become more like a Tesla factory where everything is automated from A to Z, like the whole sandwich or the pizza, from start to finish?
Yeah, I definitely see more automation in the kitchen. We actually use AI and ML for a number of use cases, right? We use it to detect anomalies, as Moody was mentioning, when it comes to hygiene and food safety. But we also use it when it comes to sequencing what orders we prepare first, right? With the way we don't necessarily cook order number 1 before number 4. We algorithmically sort them to maximize efficiency. And we sort them based on number of parameters. The main point is food should not sit on the shelf. When a driver arrives, it needs to go out the door, fresh. So we sequence it based on when the driver is expected to arrive. We also sequence it based on the time an item takes to prepare. For example, fries take 2 minutes and a burger can take 8 minutes. It doesn't make sense to prepare the fries immediately and have it go cold, waiting for the additional 6 minutes for the burger to be complete. So it actually machine learns the actual time the burger takes, and it sequences it so that they finish at the exact same time. And those are just a number of the use cases. When it comes to actually cooking automation, you're seeing more and more technology. There's a lot of smart appliances being built as we speak that is widening the categories of automation in the kitchen. And prior to COVID, this was already accelerating. Post-COVID, people are actually valuing the appliances far more because they want less contamination in the kitchen. And I see more and more embracing that concept of automation when it comes to food preparation.
To add to that, I think that when we think of automation, we're trying to solve for 2 things, right? Or 3 things now. We're trying to solve for some form of labor cost optimization. So in some cities that we operate in, it's less of a problem because it doesn't cost businesses typically that much to operate. But in some other cities that we're expanding to, when you pay $20 an hour, it starts like it becomes a viable case. The second thing we look at doing second reason we look at automating is quality, right? So as much as we're building systems to allow us to track and trace and really improve quality, I do think that as soon as you get to automate it, that you crack that overnight, right? So, and then the third one is speed. Right? I do think that at a certain point you can easily calculate throughput and accordingly, build capacity and manage demand supply patterns when you automate. So we are, looking at making sure that the last thing we want is what we feel others in our space might have done in different parts of the world, which is they still have the cook, but now they have a robot as well. Right? So you didn't really get to solve everything. So our whole idea here is if we do want to automate, we want to find ways that can completely automate the end-to-end process. And I think that we're very well positioned to get there very soon.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but something that I personally have experienced, sometimes when I know that an item, like I know that a restaurant that I'm ordering from, their item is coming from a cloud kitchen, I have experienced that the quality of the food or the taste of it, forget about maybe not the hygiene, not the quality, but the taste of it is not the same like when I'm ordering from the actual restaurant where that burger or that meal was made. Do you experience that? I mean, especially when everything becomes like an assembly line, and I mean, in certain restaurants like fast food, it is already in one or the other like that. But in more, 2-3 branch restaurants, like smaller restaurants, there is like the element of the original chef or whoever is cooking it, like making that meal. Have you received such, complaints, or what does your research tell you as well within that?
So typically, if a brand scale up, then it cannot survive. As you said, right? You've ordered from different cloud kitchens, and you've noticed the difference between the original restaurant and the cloud kitchen. And that is not the issue of a cloud kitchen, right? That's the issue more that the brand itself was not built to scale. And even if they had 2 or 3 or 4 brick and mortar restaurants, they would still struggle with the same logic, right? So there's nothing in the cloud kitchen that makes it different to a restaurant in terms of cooking procedure, right? So those remain consistent. They just didn't build a scalable product that can be replicated easily. That said, I do think there are, in some cases, risks associated to quality, to food safety, right? That's kind of one of the key themes we've been hearing that others feel they're worried about. In our case, we've managed to really advance. I mean, our kitchens are all ISO 22000 certified, right? So like the highest level of food safety standards you can find. So, and again, it comes down to one of their key themes, which is, is this product ready to scale up, right? Can you replicate it very easily? Typically, large QSR chains have built that know-how, and I guess smaller brands sometimes struggle with that, and we play a key role in helping them get there, right? So that's one of the services we do offer.
Well, how does Kitopi make money today? What's your business model?
So imagine a $100 check. You go on an aggregator, you order from a pizza brand for $100. That order comes to a kitchen closest to where you live that we cook. So a Kitopi kitchen close to where you live. That also, we see that on our screen. We start cooking the food. We then pay a brand a royalty fee for the right to use their brand. And then it's typically around 8% of every transaction. And then, the aggregator sends a driver to pick up the food, and you as a customer get a full branded experience, that of the pizza brand. And so $100, you have $8, it goes to the brand. $25 goes to the aggregator. On average, I'm talking about in general restaurant industry averages, and the rest is ours.
So help me understand the math here. I mean, every aggregator, I think every single aggregator in the world is losing money today. None of them is profitable. They're making a lot of revenues, but their EBITDA, their net income is in the negative. The restaurants are also nagging. Most restaurants say, we're losing business, our margins are slimmer, and so on. So who's winning here? Is it the customer? Where's the money coming from? What is your, if you can talk first about maybe the aggregators. I know it's not directly but you work with aggregators. They're kind of like unit economics from average order value. You said the delivery cost is the highest, cost within that. Is Kitopi coming in to kind of try to help solve that problem within the industry of improving the unit economics of the overall industry?
Yeah, look, I'll start that, and Saman, pass it on to you. So think of it as an ecosystem that's pretty broken and needs an immediate solution. The customer is definitely the winner here, and I think that's an amazing thing that the customers get more for less. And I think the aggregators are definitely delivering on what customers want, and restaurants need to adapt to this new digital age. Now, the reality is restaurants will lose money unless something changes, some dramatic changes in their business model. And we do think that aggregators will find it difficult to make money unless there is some serious optimization when it comes down to the cost of delivering food. And this is where Kitopi sits really well. And the fact that we can allow restaurants to scale up and they have no more downside risk. They have no OPEX, no CAPEX, they get instant scale. Right? And then if you look at from an aggregator perspective, we have a clear path to each aggregator and how we can cut their operating costs by half, right? Allowing them to double the amount of orders they take per hour with us versus without us, which then drives it straight to their bottom line. And I think this is how we feel we make this ecosystem work.
Yeah. Well, what I'll probably add, if you take the restaurant, as the first sort of stakeholder here, when you focus on them, what happened, right? They were doing okay, and the margins were fine in the restaurant business. But as soon as delivery became a sizable part of their demand, a lot of that demand was shifted away from dine-in, and suddenly they were paying an extra 25%. The margins weren't there most of the time to enable them to pay this extra 25% fee on top of their cost structure. So that was a big challenge. Hence the rise of cloud kitchens and the shared kitchen model that many are doing in the real estate play. But that didn't quite solve the problem. It helps. It is a cost-effective method of expansion, leasing non-prime real estate to serve that demand. But what we've done is we've accelerated the efficiencies here. We've taken a supply chain and enabled many players to tap into better purchasing power when they didn't have the volume by centralizing that supply chain. Same thing with the labor. By having mixed utilization patterns, we're able to utilize the labor a little better. We were able to pump up the orders per square foot to make it all worthwhile for the restaurant partner. Now, when you look at the aggregator, right, their cost structure is a big component of their delivery and their logistics, which is an expensive part of their costs. And by having more demand from a central location, they're able to utilize those drivers far more effectively, making it make far more sense for them as well.
But do you see like a core problem within the unit economics of aggregators in general? I mean, I've read an analysis, I'm sure you guys know a lot more than me on this, but the lifetime value of a customer for if you take like a 5-year lifetime is like in dirhams, like 200 dirhams. Do you know like any figures that you say about like a lifetime value? If you factor in all the acquisition costs that goes in and, given all the competition, all the various costs, you end up in a losing business. And that's currently what you see among a lot of aggregators. You see that changing?
Do I say that? I'll put my thoughts in before I let Moody weigh in here. But I think a big part of it is that acquisition cost, the marketing structure to begin with, right? Yeah, there's aggressive competition in the aggregator arena, and there is a lot of burning associated with that acquisition cost, with the hope that consumer will retain, right? Now, I do think that the playing fields are leveling out, and then ultimately that will yield, there is enough market share to go around, but it really depends on how aggressive they are with that acquisition to begin with.
Yeah. So look, I know the article you're referring about, and maybe I'd rather not, comment too much about the aggregator world. What I can tell you is Delivery Hero is a publicly listed company, and the Middle East is a profitable hub for them. And so I would comment about Deliveroo, and I'd assume the same for Careem, and I would say the same for Grubhub in the US, and the same for Uber Eats in multiple cities. I do think that it makes sense in a lot of cities, and in cities where they are investing heavily, they typically would, as Sam was saying, it's a pretty fierce battle out there for market share domination, and I do think they're in the business of they're acquiring users in a very aggressive way. But again, how do we see commissions moving? Right? If you think about it this way, there's two trends that we are sure are going to continue. Commissions are going to go up, and prices to consumer are going to go down. Right? So that is a big issue for the aggregator, for the restaurant. And I would say that if we think of that as it's a primary solution we're offering to allow the restaurants to be more efficient. I'm not aggregators figuring out a way to make a profit. I do think if you have a couple $1 billion poured into you, you're going to figure that piece out. It's not going to be that difficult. What I worry about is how a restaurant's going to make a living, right? Because you don't have that much money being poured there. right? So that's kind of our dilemma, is like, how do we solve a larger problem? And the larger problem in our eyes today is one for the restaurants.
Yeah, restaurants, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I think the restaurants have like a lot of challenges on the way, and they're trying to figure out, a lot of their own kind of like unit economics. I want to talk a bit about other markets. I know you guys are in different markets and looking to expand beyond that as well. I mean, just from a consumer point of view, I'll tell you that I'm here right now in the US, and when I place an order on a $30 order, I end up paying crazy amount of money on top of that between delivery fee, service charge, tax, tip. Like on a $30 order, probably end up paying like 42 or 43 with all the other additions, versus in Dubai when 7-8 dirhams, and we complain about that. So what is, and how is the Middle East making you said are profitable out of that versus other markets are not, with all these additional charges and the extra cost that the consumer is. It feels that in the Middle East, the consumer is benefiting way more than the consumer in more developed markets. So what do you think about that, and how do you see, from Kitopi's point of view, as you're trying to expand different markets and look at different dynamics and different things? What have you learned? What have you seen? What do you prepare for before going into a market, especially that's outside the Middle East?
So maybe I'll start with that second piece first, and then I'll go back to the first piece if I remember your question well. So how do we greenlight the market, right? So this is, and I think our maturity in figuring that out has evolved a lot over the past 3 years. So when we first, and I'll say this kind of maybe for the first time here, right? So when we first wanted to figure out which markets we're going to go to, obviously the Middle East, there was a couple of big cities that we knew we wanted to be in. And then I do think that there's an element of immature ego that played in, right? Like, oh, we can do the US and UK super easy. It's markets we need to get in, and we need to conquer the world, right? And I think that while we do want to go back into the US and we do want to conquer the world, I do think that a lot more maturity in terms of how we think of going, right? So we have a 3-step process. So when we want to go. And I do think that any business needs to earn the right to expand. And that's something we're very cautious to really honor, right? So I don't think that any business can expand. I do think it needs to earn that right. And it doesn't just mean how much money you've raised, right? It really means, how's your operation? Like, are you able to replicate what you do? And can you execute really well, right? How's the team's readiness? How's the unit economics of the business overall, both top line to bottom line? And I do think that's kind of a key trigger. We've put key triggers that give us that right. And if we don't have a trigger, we just don't have the right to expand. And I think that holds us all accountable on when we think we're ready as a business. The second piece of it is then where do you want to expand to? And this is where having an army of McKinsey consultants on board helps you kind of navigate and set frameworks of how do you think about greenlighting a city? Does it make sense? Does it not? And then we have a four-dimensional exercise, a little too smart for my thinking here. But the reality is, like, we looked at 140 cities in different parts of the world, and we came to a set of cities that we think were best positioned to win. It makes sense for us. And then once you're in that, once you've sorted them all out, and you know that that's kind of the cluster of cities you're going to go after next, is then how are you going to get there, right? So we have over 100-page document in every city on how we're going to make that city work. We have teams on the ground working on this ahead of time, and I think we're in a place where we understand exactly how to replicate what we do very efficiently. Again, as long as kind of the first and second piece are in place, we think that we're looking at execution in a very granular level. That's something we haven't done before, right? And I think that a big part is the team we have on board, and our maturity as a business has allowed us to really think in this way.
What has been your most successful city so far that you've expanded to, and why as well?
Look, I do think headquarters will always, for most companies, I guess, remain to be the most successful of all cities. I do think that's where most leadership teams sit and spend their time in. And so, we are very proud to be based out of Dubai, and I do think that the UAE in general is a very successful country for us. But that said, Saudi Arabia is was our fastest growing city until last month. Kuwait exceeded it, and I do think that's an amazing battle of both cities really growing super fast. It's a good problem to have in our case. And we see that, like, if we look at every single city we've launched are hitting thresholds are hitting certain milestones much faster than the city before, right? So I do think that the expansion team are getting things right, and the overall team is just really knowing how to execute new markets much better than the older markets.
What's your main growth driver when you put a kind of expansion plan and attack a city? How do you acquire customers? What is your approach that you think have worked best, and have you changed that over time as well?
Look, I think the biggest change for us is we usually now grow through acquisition, and we've become like an integration machine, right, on how we integrate businesses into Kitopi. And I do think that's one of the ways we think is most efficient in our world of how we can expand. So the simple version here is, imagine in a previous world, we used to, take users from point A to point B, and in point B, they didn't have any users, and we had to help them create a user base, right? So they're the ones spending money, but we had to kind of be patient on them being able to acquire users efficiently. And in a new model, we actually are going, instead of telling them, take you from point A to point B, we want your point A business on day one. So we'll go to that city, take over a few businesses, and operate them on day one. So that's been working for us, and that's something we'll continuously do.
So yeah, something I'll add to that is that, in the past, if you just had a great restaurant, that should have been enough. You should do well and you should grow. Today, you see a lot of good businesses, good brands closing down. And you question why. They weren't able to make their economics work. So part of our strategy, as Moody was mentioning, is when we enter a city, we find some of these brands that do have a couple of locations, but they're on the edge. And then they become a customer and a client and a partner on our platform when we take over their infrastructure. It's also a very efficient way of utilizing existing infrastructure, right? A lot of people are sort of rebuilding the infrastructure from the ground up, building new kitchens, when there's a lot of existing real estate that could be repurposed.
Sam, on the tech side, and especially as you start to expand globally, probably your HQ in Dubai will be the core of that tech side. And on talent specifically, how's been your experience with hiring talent in Dubai and the UAE? Are they all based in the UAE, or do you have tech team in other locations?
So it's been extremely tough, very, very tough. So when we decided that we were going to build up our own tech stack, the very first thing I did was look for a phenomenal VP of engineering that can complement my shortcomings. I haven't programmed since university, right? And I made some mistakes in prior startups, which, I think the biggest fear of any entrepreneur is you build something that nobody wants, and then some things you build something that people do want, but no one's really willing to pay for. I had both those issues, and I had a third issue, which was building horrible tech stacks, right? Worked with the wrong people, put the wrong assumptions, ended up building something that really nobody actually wanted. So when we started, especially when we started raising funds and getting trusted investors on board, we were very cautious with making sure this money was well spent. And the first thing I did was look for great talent. And our engineering hub is based out of Poland. Literally put on a backpack, went to Eastern Europe. A little bit about sort of the train of thought of how I landed in Poland. Went on HackerRank, a very popular tool for screening engineers. One of the benefits of using HackerRank is because so many people do tests on it, it starts categorizing best countries and nationalities when it comes to certain programming languages. So went there, ended up shortlisting Poland, went to Poland. In Poland, went to a town called Krakow, known for a really great tech university, and worked with a lot of headhunters looking for a great VP of engineering to work with, landed one, and then started building up my team from the ground up from Poland. All our engineers are in Poland. We have our whole tech team is roughly 80 people today. And half of that sits out of Poland in terms of engineering. Our product, 20% sits out of Poland and the remaining is out of Dubai. Product specifically, being gatherer and understandings of what needs to be built. And I wanted that as close to the business as possible. As Modi was mentioning earlier, tech is built in partnership with the business. So they work very closely when it comes to understanding what needs need to be solved. And our data team sits out of Dubai as well. That said, even when we came to finding the right product talent, it was a bit challenging coming. A lot of the recruits we had, we flew them from different countries. I flew people from the States, from Russia, as well as Poland.
So you went down the route of more like importing talent one way or the other to Dubai, the ones that are based out of Dubai, rather than hiring from within. Do you see this big discrepancy in terms of the quality and knowledge versus, that's one area. And then another area is salaries and pay and so on within the UAE.
So it wasn't salaries. That definitely wasn't the factor sort of about decision making. When it comes to the quality of talent, every emerging sort of country has a learning curve, right? And today Dubai has phenomenal talent. You've had successes like Kareem and many countless, great tech companies come out of Dubai, Property Finder for one, right? So there is a great talent pool, but there's also a lot of startups being built, right, at the same time. And when you just benchmark that with sort of the West and how product is practiced there, they've gone through that learning curve. There's been many, hundreds of massive successes, and Poland in particular is a hub of tech development for many in the West, right, and in Europe. So, for example, Google has an R&D center there. You have IBM too, and Motorola, and in many ways it ended up serving as an accelerated form of training and education for the talent pool there. So building something extremely complex, you try to draw a parallel with the talent pool you're working with. For example, our VP of engineering, one of the biggest reasons to why we partnered with him was he was the CTO of Impost, which is, they just recently went public for I think 7 billion euros or more. And he was working on complex parcel automation. So sequencing parcels, logically routing them correctly, automating them. Immediately when I saw that experience, I drew a parallel between that and food, in terms of how we route our food items and how we sequence those in the kitchen. So there was a great correlation there. And when you have that sort of relevance, you just work with so much more speed.
That's very interesting. And what's your kind of approach for hiring technical talent, like your VP of engineering or others, hiring process or interview process that you go through?
So one common factor that starts with the entire, also everyone at Kitopi, is a culture bar test, what we call a bar test, right? It's really making sure that they would, are compatible with the values that we have. I think you hear values get preached a lot, right? Values are important. And I think it was probably in our second year did we really understand what values mean to an organization, this tribal mindset of all being on the same wavelength, on agreeing on a few principles that you've all aligned with. There are many great characteristics that we should all carry, but really banking and betting on the ones that matter most. And that has become something we don't compromise on when it comes to finding the right talent curve. So that's something we emphasize really heavily on. And then second, it comes to the talent quality, the hard skills, right? Understanding. And there's a lot of case studies and tests that we do with that. We do workshops where we see the dynamic interactions and we get to actually trial what working together would look like, usually in the best mutual benefit to both the candidate and us.
When it comes to values, do you know what Kitopi is like? As you said, every company has values that are written down on paper, but values usually many times happen unintentionally. They're based on, many times on the founders, like founders' personalities and culture, like kind of expand to the whole team. What is like the one defining thing of the Kitopi culture or your team?
How would I define Kitopi's culture? Like
one word or one sentence. Like how would you? What do you say is the overarching like?
I'll say first of all, transparency. That's one that sort of embodies all. We're a very transparent business. We really embody all our team into our decision making as much as possible. Even when COVID occurred, we were very conscious to making sure everybody was aware every step of the way. And we do that through a series of broadcasts. We do, we have all hands. We actually have a global all hands and a tech all hands. And we have a sequence of many events we do to keep everybody informed with what we're doing. And we really, with that transparency, down to even fundraising to an extent, to really make everyone understand that they are a partner on this journey, and they get a share and a massive say in what we do.
Speaking of fundraising, I wouldn't want to finish this podcast without tapping on that. Mo, can you share a little bit more about, I mean, both of you, but I think, from Mo side, in terms of your experience on fundraising, you fundraise, you're one of the most funded startups in the region, especially in the last year. What has been your approach, your key learnings, the mistakes that you've done with that process that other founders can learn from?
So first, I think that we don't look at how much money we've raised as a metric of success. And I do think that's one of the mistakes that we feel some founders would fall into. And it's not just how much money you've raised. I actually wish we only raised nothing, right? I wish we just never raised money and we built what we built. But the reality is our business is capital intensive, and to achieve what we want to achieve, we had to raise what we achieved. Now, I think that, key things here is find the right set of investors very early on. I think we were very lucky, and we were not experienced. Like I've never fundraised in my life. I just sold a business. I never really fundraised before. So that was something I think we were very lucky to have. Our first two investors were phenomenal, right? And that paved the way for everything else thereafter. So we have 16 investors on board now. And I think that, we've been very clear. So this is how I do it. Our processes of fundraising are very tight. So we raise money in less than a month, right? And we're very clear with our process of start to finish, how we want to do it, who we want to do it. And I do think it's a form of a dance. It's an art more than a science, I would say. And I think that knowing how to dance in this very tight time is a very important skill that founders, I think, need to be able to build on. It is not you think of it as like dating, right? Like if you were to go and date someone, it's not a transaction. I mean, I think most dating is not a transaction. And then there is an element where you need to figure out how to get that person to like you, how to make yourself feel, how to make, you look like you're the most important person in the world, but also that you are very scarce and there's not much of you, right? And think of it both ways. And it's the same kind of philosophy in fundraising, right? So how do you make sure that they can see you as the best company ever, and that there are very little time to make a decision. I think the second you give someone too much time, they end up not making a decision, right? So like very tight processes, make it super fast, and again, be very genuine and honest. I think that's a very important thing. Is investors see on average good investors see on average like 1,000 deals a year. They call bullshit really fast. They can see it, right? So no matter how much you try and sell and do, they know exactly what's real and what's not real. And the other day, I asked Sam, I'll give an example of level of transparency we believe in. I asked Sam, I was like, you know what? Our fourth generation kitchen, what do you think? Sam was doing a tech demo the other day. And I was like, what do you think if you introduce that fourth generation kitchen in that tech demo? He's like, no, I won't. I was like, why? He's like, because I don't know when I'm going to deliver on it. And I just don't want to be not honest. And I think that's kind of, what investors see as, they know that what we're saying is going to be delivered on. And we're going to actually overachieve it, right? So, and that's been something very important, is to build credibility versus, being. You can lie once, but then that's it. You're going to be called on it, and then you're out, right? So I think that being honest and genuine, running a tight process, having amazing investors early on and not many of them is kind of my advice here.
What has been your easiest and most difficult round that you've done?
It gets harder every round, and I think that the more you raise, the more complex the rounds are. And I think that we've been pretty fortunate to have a smooth sailing process. But I think that we're not. We're anticipating, more challenges coming ahead as you raise much larger rounds. That said, the fundamentals remain the same. If you have a great business, I do think that you will get the right investor. I do think that it's not a milestone. And one of the mistakes we did, maybe a final point of mine, one of the mistakes we did early on was we were solving for what the investor wants. Right? I remember I was in a board meeting not so long ago, and one of our investors said, "Why don't you move to this location much faster? Because I'm sure you can raise more money." And maybe a year before that board, we would have said, "It's a great idea. You'll be solving for what the investor wants, what the future investor wants." And we said no. And we said no, obviously, in collaboration with them, and we have amazing dynamics in our board. But we said no, and it was a clear no. It was not. It took us 1 second to figure out no. Why? Because we're solving for what the customer wants. And if we solve for what the customer wants, we can grow efficiently, we can hit the right bottom line, and every single investor will wait in queue to come in.
That's so important what you just mentioned. I've heard that from a lot of founders as well. Partly experienced that myself also. Like, it's for founders, it's very important to know, when to not not everything you need to entertain. Your investors are your partners, but not always, the interests are equal or the same. So you have to kind of be very smart about, being diplomatic at the same time, doing, like you said, always what's best for the business and what's best for the same vision. Especially as you start getting a lot of investors on board. When you grow, you have 10, or some startups have 15 different investors on board. So that's a very good point and learning take. When it comes to transparency, before kind of end to the closing notes, have you expanded that beyond your team and your investors? Do you have like a public product roadmap? Do you share metrics and updates with the public in what's known as building in public? Do you do that at all in spirit of the transparency?
Yeah, so that transparency we embody is completely open. Metrics internally are completely within everybody's disposal. Even our dashboards are very much self-service. Everybody has access to see where we stand revenue-wise, profitability-wise. That sort of information is really open within. And our product roadmap, our tech roadmap, once again, is within. Keep in mind, we have close to 1,000, Moody knows, I think it's roughly 1,500 plus Kitopians within our organization alone. So that's a lot of communication and then a lot of involvement.
But do you ever consider making that public to your customer?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I actually this morning was talking to one of our investors, and I was talking to him about info rights and where we share information, where we don't. And he was challenging me on that point, and exactly what you said.
Yeah.
So today we are not public with information that we feel it's a very competitive landscape. And we are the first movers, and we're innovating on this global level. But I do see a world where we will be more public with what we do. I think it's just a timing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits from building in public versus risks when it comes to competitors and so on. But in general, there's a lot of benefits for creating, or transferring that transparency to your customers and to the entire, ecosystem that you serve.
I'm going to pick your brain on that offline.
Yeah.
On a closing note, where do you see Kitopi next? What's next for Kitopi?
And I'll take that, pass on to you after. So what's next? We've just launched our new values, something that we feel very proud of. So I do think that's we're spending a lot of time there, making sure that we're raising the bar continuously. We're excited to expand to new markets as well. So we think that a lot more to come this year. We're branching into Southeast Asia, which is exciting for us. And I think that Sam, would you add anything to that?
I can tell you on the tech stack, right? In that sense, there's a lot we're investing in that space. where we're doubling our team over this year. The opportunities we're investing in, a lot in data. We're investing heavily in leveraging our data infrastructure. A big part of what we focused on was really capturing so many data points. Today, we're actually talking about automating actions based on those data points, dynamic discounting and many other things. We're also upgrading our command center. So our command center is essentially is what we use to monitor and troubleshoot orders globally. So we're investing heavily in this function to detect issues before they do become issues, to again better the consumer journey, and many other things in the kitchen when it comes to smart robotics.
That's awesome, guys. We're already over an hour. This went by quick. I know, Mo, you thought that it was a bit too long, but it went quick, at least for me. And thank you for coming on. And I think you already started by doing this podcast to share more in public, because you shared a lot today about what you guys are doing and what you're up to. And I think everyone watching now and be listening later to the podcast will have to learn a lot. Thank you very much for joining. It was really great to have you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like this podcast and want to listen to more episodes, subscribe to the Maté Conversations podcast on one of your favorite podcast channels.